This podcast is a part of the Local Government Podcast Network, where we give local governments a voice.
Welcome to the Building Amazing Cities and Towns podcast, the podcast for mayors, city council members, managers, staff, and anyone who's interested in building an amazing city. Your host is Jim Hunt, the author of Bottom Line Green, How American Cities Are Saving the Planet and Money Too, and his latest book, The Amazing City, 7 Steps to Creating an Amazing City. Jim is also the former president of the National League of Cities, 27-year mayor, city council member, and 2006 Municipal Leader of the Year by American City and County Magazine. Today, Jim speaks to thousands of local government officials each year in the U.S. and abroad. Jim is also consults with businesses that are bringing technology and innovation to local governments. Jim, how you doing today?
Great, Matt. Appreciate you joining me again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, after the way we finished the last one, you gave a couple of stories, so I think we might have a little humor today as we talk about the second A in Amazing, which is attention to detail. Tell us a little bit about what you mean by attention to detail, and maybe share some examples.
Yeah, probably. When we talked about attitude and being probably the most important of the 7 steps to create an amazing city, and then motivation, that really is what gets you out of bed in the morning and gets to doing the actual work. But I think then when we start thinking is there's got to be, what is that attention to detail? What is that extra little bit that separates the average from the amazing? And I think attention to detail probably does it more often than not. And it's a little bit about, I think we all remembered back when we went on our first job interview, and our parents would tell us, or one of our teachers would tell us that, you can have a new suit on, you could be dressed up, your hair could be just cut, but if your shoes have mud on them, it sends a message that really that I just don't care as much about this job or about this opportunity. And I think in many ways that same characteristic goes for cities. I've been in thousands of cities all over the world, and that initial look at a city is what sometimes stays in your head forever. And it's hard to erase a negative image and something to where just doesn't make the grade. I'll give you an example of one that happens to me on a regular basis. I'll be driving around town and I'll see a major brand, let's say, and I think this describes the difference, that you'll see a company that has invested millions of dollars in building their brand. And today, obviously we have all of these, like a Walmart, McDonald's, Target, and on the sides of their buildings, they'll have the letters, let's say Target spelled out, and one of the bulbs goes out in the letter. And instead of being Target, it's something else. And instead of being Walmart, it's Allmart or whatever. And so when we see that, it might have just gone out 10 minutes ago. But it also, when you see it the second time, you start to think, I wonder if they're paying attention to detail. If you go to a restaurant and the letter has been out for 6 weeks, you kind of wonder whether they've been cleaning the grill or some other aspect of the food preparation or wearing gloves and so forth. So in cities, I think the same thing happens on attention to detail. And when I wrote the book, The Amazing City, 7 Steps to Creating an Amazing City, I didn't exactly know how it was going to fit in, but it actually did perfectly. That bringing attention to detail into the building, creating of an amazing city. I think as I go around, some of the examples that I use is that, you go into some towns and they're just perfect. Everything is right in line. Every curb is painted perfectly. There's, if there's graffiti, it's you don't even know it was there. And so those are the type of things when I talk about attention to detail. And also from a local government perspective, how do you do things that eliminate sometimes the opportunities for having some faux pas, if you will? One example, and I'll give you one that's maybe a little different, is that LED lighting now. One of the characteristics of LED lighting is that it lasts for a very long time. So many cities, and I know Detroit is having this unbelievable rebirth and reinvention in Detroit to go from what used to be the center of the world in auto manufacturing, and it went into it was portrayed in movies, it was portrayed in the media as this city that was almost just beyond repair. But I was in Detroit not too long ago, and I have to tell you that one of the ways that Detroit is rebranding and reinventing themselves is that they've invested a considerable amount of money in LED lighting. And in addition to looking better, it lights up the city. It's beautiful. And when you drive down some of the streets in Detroit, even though there are still some buildings that are fallen in and some vacant properties and so forth, this lighting just makes it look like Hollywood. So that's kind of the idea when I talk about attention to detail, is looking at things that have a visible impact in your community, that are sustainable and that can add to the work that other people are doing. You can have businesses in your community that are working very hard. They keep their storefronts clean, they clean their windows, sweep their sidewalks and all. But if the next building has graffiti all over it and has not been attended to, and there's garbage in the doorways and all, it's pretty hard for those businesses to succeed when other properties are not holding up and paying attention to detail.
Yeah, you mentioned in the motivation podcast, the last one, that sometimes you can go into a city and it's nice, but it's missing something. It's missing just a little bit, and it could be the nice bright lights, or it could be a number of things. What are some other things that you've seen as you've traveled, speaking around and working with some of the other projects that you work on?
Well, I think one of the misnomers about attention to detail is that some cities are too big or too unwieldy to pay attention to detail. And my good friend Joe Buscaino is a council member in Los Angeles, the second largest city in the country. And I think sometimes small, I work with cities of all sizes, predominantly actually more small cities than large cities, in small towns and villages. And a lot of times when I'm called in, and they looking at what they do and what a city like Los Angeles does is completely different. And I point out to them that Joe Buscaino in his district in Los Angeles, which has, I think, 285 residents, bigger than many large cities in the United States, that one of Joe's major focus of his elected office is paying attention to detail. That they go out on Saturdays and clean up alleyways in Los Angeles. They have an art program where the utility boxes that seem to be a magnet for graffiti and for a lot of negative type of things, the look of an area, that they are doing this very innovative art program where they have art competitions, and then they turn that art into these, you've seen, Matt, I'm sure, the vehicles where they've wrapped them with this, I don't know what the type of plastic or whatever. It's
yeah, sure.
Yeah. So they've done this with these utility boxes. And what they've found is that although occasionally they're still graffitied, but many times graffiti is a lot of times done by artists. I mean, honestly, graffiti, I think, is an art that is underappreciated, and we ought to do more to stimulate that in many of our cities. But it's done by artists, and when they see this artwork being put on these utility boxes, they don't graffiti it. So, so it's kind of interesting to me that a large city council person is spending so much time on attention to detail that smaller cities should take notice, because that is what makes a city amazing. Another instance, and I was down in St. Petersburg, Florida, and the former mayor of St. Petersburg, Rick Baker, a very innovative mayor, had done a lot in St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg is a beautiful, amazing city. And I learned how St. Petersburg became an amazing city. So we were there with probably about 30 or 40 city officials from all over the country. And Mayor Baker was taking us on this guided tour throughout the city. So naturally, and I've done this in my city and I've been around other cities, you never want to bring up anything bad, or if you see something real bad, you kind of want the bus to look, you turn and point to the other side of the bus to make sure that your visitors don't see what's some of the bad things in your community. But on this tour that we were doing with these city leaders, Rick asked the bus driver to pull into a parking area. And the bus driver pulled in, and we thought that we were going to see some amazing new thing that they were doing in St. Petersburg. And Rick jumped off the bus, and I saw him get on his cell phone. And so he's on the phone for a few minutes, and then the bus door opened. He jumps back on, and I was sitting in the seat right next to him. And so he said, "Oh, I'm sorry." He said, "I had to make a call." And I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "What was it?" And he said, "See over there at this," and it was this public housing, subsidized housing development that they'd done in St. Petersburg. And he said, "I noticed that the screens were hanging off of one of the windows, and it really looked pretty bad. I didn't want anybody to focus on it." But he said, I called the director of the housing authority. And all of a sudden, it just hit me. That's why St. Petersburg is amazing, is that when the mayor of a city is out with these city leaders from all over the country wanting to show off the beauty and the nice things in this town, that he took the time to pay attention to detail. And I'm sure that the director of the city's housing authority probably was a regular recipient of phone calls from the mayor. But that's how you build an amazing city. You don't let things get out of the way. Sometimes, and I used to do it in my city, and I think it's an excellent idea and let me tell you, technology has made this such an easy thing to do that citizens, that there are apps now that that cities are adopting, where you can go out and if you see something, if you see graffiti, somebody had graffitied an area of town, if there was an old tire in a lot or overgrown grass in a vacant lot, you can take a picture of that. And through artificial intelligence, and I'm sure, Matt, you're the technical guy of the two of us, but through artificial intelligence, they're able to determine exactly what it is. So all of a sudden, you take a picture with your smartphone, it pops up that says overgrown grass, and you confirm it. You click yes. And then it sends it directly to City Hall, to the correct department, whether it's Public Works or the Park Department or whatever. And then you get a response that says when it will be taken care of. And then, so you send it in, you get this confirmation. And then let's say 2 days later, when it's been taken care of, you get a response back from that department that tells you it was done. And so I say this to the point of that is that attention to detail is something that does truly make cities amazing. People notice in the largest cities in America and the smallest cities in America, attention to detail can make a difference. When you go to, I've been to Breckenridge, and I've to speak to the Colorado Municipal League. They meet, fortunately for me, they meet in Breckenridge every year, and they've evidently enjoyed what I have to say because they keep inviting me back. But I've been to Breckenridge several times, and Breckenridge is an amazing city, a very wealthy city, very high cost of living there, and a lot of, a resort type area. But when you go to Breckenridge, you walk down the streets, it's just as clean as a pin. The sidewalks there's no weeds growing out of them. They've got just a very attractive city. Now, when I say that, people will say sometimes, well, gee, Jim, that's easy. That's a wealthy community. They have tons of money and so forth. But guess what? Many cities that are not Breckenridge really needs to clean up and do some of the little things, very inexpensive, pulling weeds out, cleaning vacant lots, removing graffiti and so forth. And all of a sudden, it turns into a Breckenridge, an amazing city, a place that is clean and neat. And that's something that I think a lot of times we take for granted. We think that, oh, well, the reason a city is amazing is because of the economy or, the budgets that they have. And it is not that at all. I think that cities that in economically challenged areas, maybe even more so than other areas, should pay attention to detail because it's so noticeable. And if you go into many cities, and I've proven this time and time again, that during my elected career, there would be certain things that I would go out and drive around my town, and I would make a list of things that I'd see that I just bothered me. It might be there'd be a stop sign, and it was hanging by one bolt, and it kind of was turned a little bit off center. But it looked to me like this is a town that doesn't care when you allow things like that to happen. And so I would immediately make note of it, call the right department or call the city manager in many cases and let them know, and they would have it fixed. And then I'd be driving down the next day. I'd feel like, oh, at least I did this kind of little bit of improvement in our community. But let me point out, one of the key things that I think is important in local government, and that is it's someone else's job. And in an amazing city, it's everyone's job. It's citizens' jobs. It's businesses' jobs. It's the staff of the city. It's the person who drives the garbage truck in the town. That attention to detail is something that let's give an example. In many cities, the public works department in the city, or the police department, fire departments, and so forth, they are in parts of the city that in many cases a city council person may not be on their normal passing around. So even though you try and get out and see as much of your city as you can, it might be that when you instill this attention to detail, and the reason why it's important to the entire staff of the city, and make that part of the thing that says, this is what we do in our town. We have attention to detail. We reward our staff when they find some of these outlying things that might not have been noticed for months, and they bring it to our attention or take an initiative and fix it themselves. Amazing cities have instilled that in their staff. They've instilled it in the parks department and in community groups. Many of us participate in these cleanups through civic clubs and Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, and organizations like that, to where the bags and the grabber type things and the gloves and all are provided by either some cleanup initiative by the state or the city. But those type of initiatives one of the key things, and I learned this early on in my career, is that it takes the interest of community leaders to participate. A Boy Scout troop might go out and clean up on a Saturday once, and then that's their community project. But I guarantee you, if the mayor shows up, if the council shows up, if the city manager and leaders in the community, business people, that generates an interest in that activity. And all of a sudden you have this kind of an inspiring type activity to where, and I'll tell you, I was doing cleanup for the Kiwanis Club in my town, and it hit me that a lot of people, we were out on the side of the road on a Saturday morning picking up litter and beer cans and all the stuff that people had thrown out. And a lot of people were driving by that I knew. And they're waving at me, and I would wave back and smile and give them a thumbs up and all. And of course, I didn't realize until later that the same, we wore these orange outfits to clean up, but that was the same ones that prisoners were wearing to do the cleanup. So I didn't know whether people were kind of smiling at me because they thought I was picked up or caught for something, or whether I was doing a civic duty. But those are the type of things in amazing cities. It's encouraged, and leadership leads from the bottom up, and they go out and work with the community. They're first to volunteer, and they're on the front lines. And when you see that happening in a community, sometimes the question might be asked, well, how do I get that started in my community? In many cases, it's kind of not, I say this, you'll know what I mean, but it's not so much shaming people into it, but it's inviting them. And if, let's say, if the mayor's invited, or council, or the manager and all, if they're invited one week and they don't, there's something, they say, well, I have an event, or I have something that I'm going to be out of town. Continue to invite, continue to keep that motivation going, because what you'll find is that after a while, very few elected officials, people in the public eye, businesses and all, very few of them turn down like 3 or 4 times in a row to a group of Boy Scouts or a civic club. So persistence probably goes right along with attention to detail. But that is the way to build an amazing city.
And also, everything that you've mentioned, all the stories, it's contagious. The utility box program in Los Angeles keeps the graffiti from happening, and that leads to the next thing. That's a good move to the attention to detail. The employees in the city see that, hey, there's people, the mayor stopped to call in a broken window, and the other staff on the city's roster says, hey, that's something we should be on the lookout for. And all of that good effort is contagious.
Exactly. And you brought up a good point. It just kind of hit me in my head. My thinking process sometimes is spurred on by things that you say. But one of the things that I think has been made so much easier now is with the advent of social media, we have in our pockets one of the best public relations tools that we can encourage people to pay attention to detail. And I use this to my advantage. At one point in my working career, I was the executive director of it was called Campus Neighborhoods Revitalization Corporation. And part of that was in a university community. And there was a section of town that literally had no attention to detail. It was one of the most, it looked like it was a war zone in this college community. And I think we know why. That's something that happens in many places where young people are first out of their homes and they're into apartments and dorms, that their attention to detail really goes out the door. So I would drive through the neighborhood, and I was responsible for, in a way, creating an amazing neighborhood. Maybe that's a little bit of some of my on the ground experience with this. But when I first took the job, I drove through the community, and they used big green dumpsters, and there was a lot of multifamily, and so you had these big dumpsters that the trash trucks would come in, lift them up, and dump them out, and there'd be red cups and paper and all flying around the neighborhood. But what would happen? The students, when the football team won a game, they would burn the dumpsters. When they lost a game, they burnt the dumpsters. When Osama bin Laden was captured that night, every dumpster in this neighborhood was on fire. It was a terrible thing, and driving around that community, the attention to detail, you could see no good when you saw all of these burnt out dumpsters. So I knew that if I was going to be successful in my job of being the executive director of this organization responsible for the appearance of this neighborhood, that I had to get my hands around these dumpsters and figure out how we change that and make it an attention to detail. And what we did was, there was a parents' weekend coming, and so I thought, well, let's get one dumpster and bring it to a parking lot, and we're going to paint it in the school colors, which was blue and gold. And I thought, well, this will be a great thing. We can get this dumpster done, and we'll do one dumpster. We'll post it on social media. Everybody will be commenting on it, and we will really make a difference on this one dumpster. So that Saturday, we ended up with a huge turnout of parents. And then, of course, the parents brought their kids that they were visiting to come if they were going to do this thing. So I had purchased a couple gallons of blue paint. And so the parents, and we had brushes and so forth. And within, this was my miscalculation, we started, I think it was 9 o'clock in the morning. We had probably 40 parents and students, and just a handful of paintbrushes and paint. And within 15 minutes, they'd painted this dumpster, and it looked tremendous. It had been all burnt up, and we painted it. It looked beautiful. We had the blue and gold colors on it. And one of the parents came to me and says, "Can we go and paint more dumpsters? It's only 9:15. And I said, well, yeah. And so they started down an alleyway in the neighborhood. And out of that, I think it was 3 or 4 gallons of paint that I'd had. And I thought this would be a year's supply of paint. But they went down this alleyway and completely painted every dumpster in the alley. And in the meantime, they were picking up garbage and cups and so forth and putting them in the dumpsters. And by 11 o'clock, we'd painted, I think there was 20 some dumpsters. We'd cleaned up the entire alleyway, and we took pictures, and that was the point of the social media. We took pictures with our phones and showed the before and the afters. I did a little video. I was interviewed. We invited the television stations to come and cover this event. And it multiplied to where all of a sudden we were getting volunteers calling us up and saying, could we be part of the dumpster program? And ended up, I think at one time there was about 120 dumpsters that had been burnt, which included every dumpster in this neighborhood, 120 dumpsters. And every one of them were painted by volunteers through this program. And then the beauty that happened, because every time we put the logo of the organization, it was called Sunny Side Up, and we had a sunshine, and we made a stencil. So we logoed all of these dumpsters that literally everywhere you went, the landlords were coming to me and saying, thank you for painting the dumpster. And they knew it was us because it had our logo on it. So as I built that program, it had a life of its own, and people, there would be kids that would go out to start to burn a dumpster, and there would be other kids that spent their Saturday painting it that would tell them, don't burn my dumpster, burn another dumpster. Don't burn the one I painted, because I'm really proud of it. And it changed the culture. Now, I'd be dishonest to say that we stopped all of the burning, But one of the things we learned was that once you paint 120 dumpsters and have them all in really top condition, on a Saturday night, if 3 of them were burnt, on Monday morning, we just had to paint 3 dumpsters. And the look of the neighborhood became more likely to see these dumpsters and clean alleyways, and we cut the brush and cleaned around the dumpsters and all, that became something that was the worst eyesore in the neighborhood, became the kind of the signature of that neighborhood. And the Sunnyside logo on these dumpsters were in news stories. They were in all sorts of things in a positive nature of how the neighborhood was coming back. So when I say attention to detail, something like dumpsters that no one would think, geez, I want to spend my career, painting burnt out dumpsters with garbage and all of this, turned into something that I think really made a difference in that neighborhood and led to a revitalization that brought in close to $500 million of new development into that neighborhood. And, it's a piece of the puzzle that has to be present in order for to be truly amazing. Because if, you can be a nice neighborhood, you can be a nice community, a nice town or city, but we're going for amazing. That's the purpose of what I've spent my life's work in local government. And I know, Matt, with your work with the Local Government Podcast Network, of highlighting these type of stories and using technology and the media to get those messages out where people then realize it's infectious. And the more people that see that, of the positive side of building amazing cities, the more they want to participate. And I'm constantly amazed when I hear stories from all over the country. And maybe we're probably getting close to the end, but let me close maybe with this little story about Fairhope, Alabama. Fairhope is a little town outside of Mobile, Alabama, and I didn't even know it existed. I had no idea. And I went down to Mobile for a meeting, and they said, we're going to have a tour of Fairhope, Alabama. And I was thinking kind of like, so what? I've never heard of it. What is there? And they said, it is one of the most beautiful towns, small towns in America. And that piqued my interest. And I said, well, geez, that sounds interesting. What makes it so, in a way, what makes it so amazing? And they said, don't worry, you'll see. So the bus takes us over to Fairhope. And the council lady, Debbie Quinn, was on council at that time. And Debbie loved her community and was so proud of it, and was one of the main reasons we were going to Fairhope. So we drove into downtown and we got off the bus. And I will tell you this, and I'm sure that it's the same way today. When we walked off the bus, I saw more hanging flowers than I've ever seen in my life. Every street post had a hanging flower. Every business had 3 or 4 hanging flower arrangements. This town of Fairhope, Alabama, its signature is these hanging plants. And so you're thinking, that's no big deal. I've gone to a lot of towns with hanging plants. You've not been to Fairhope, Alabama, because you would know in Fairhope, the hanging plants and that beauty of this colorful, every store, every home, every light post and all, that you will see that it creates this attention to detail that Fairhope, you'll never forget. And I guarantee, and I tell people this all the time when I speak, and I was up in New Hampshire a few weeks ago, and when I use stories like Fairhope, Alabama, I always tell the audience, I said, if you're driving down in Alabama one day and you see a sign that says Fairhope 30 miles, it is worth it to drive 30 miles to see the amazing city of Fairhope, Alabama, because of what they've created through this hanging plants. Something that is simple, something that is inexpensive, something that all of us can visualize that we could do it, But whether we have that attention to detail and the motivation to do it, to play off of our last session, but that's what makes cities amazing, is having that attention to detail.
Yeah, I think as you told the Sunnyside story with the dumpsters, the utility box program in LA, and then the hanging flower baskets in Fairhope, you hit on everything that we've covered so far. Having the attitude to make a difference, having the motivation to make an impact on your community, the attention to detail, and then also that we're almost kind of leading into the Z in amazing, a little bit of zing in there as well, which we'll talk about next time. But it all goes together, and it doesn't have to be big expensive programs. Sometimes it can be as simple as $100 of paint, or some beautiful flowers, or a little creative way to address a graffiti issue. I think those are all incredible stories.
And Matt, when we get into the zing, and as you can tell, each time that we go and preview the next episode of the podcast, I get more and more excited, because I don't know whether it's how it builds to that we're getting close to putting all of this together to say this is the secret of how you create an amazing city. But the zing, and just to preview that a little bit, the zing in a community, I think, is one of the most, if somebody, it may be on my tombstone, and I hope that that's a long time from now, but having zing on my tombstone would be really the epitome of what I've spent my life doing. And that is that a community needs something unique, something that, like Fairhope, Alabama, something that we can look at and say, what's the zing in your community? What makes it special? What makes it unique? And I know that there's people out there listening that they're probably a little puzzled, and they'll say, well, I've lived in my town for my whole life, and I can't tell you what the zing in my community is. Well, we're going to explore that, and we're going to sort out the process of identifying the zing. And I think what you'll see is that the zing in an amazing city can be many, many different things. It's not one thing. It's not, in some cases it is one thing. When we look at Paris, you asked a group of people, what's the zing in Paris? Now, there's many, many, many things in Paris that are just amazing, but the Eiffel Tower seems to be the one that people point to. But there's no wrong answers. Notre Dame is, and when you think about the terrible fire in Paris, and they're rebuilding a zing, they're rebuilding an amazing city, an amazing icon within an amazing city, we start to see the importance of identifying the zing and the value of that to a community. And once again, when we hit on the zing, I think it'll be one of the pivotal pieces of the puzzle of building an amazing city. And I'm excited for next week to come on, and we'll talk about the zing in communities.
Yeah, it's an exciting episode. I know there's going to be some interesting examples that you're going to share with us. So we'll leave it at there. Attention to detail, very important in every aspect of of your city or town. You gave some great examples, and we look forward to the next episode where we'll dive into zing a little bit more. Jim, thanks for this episode. Thanks for sharing everything. If you enjoyed the podcast, we'd really appreciate it if you leave a review. If you're on Apple, you can leave the review right there. If you're on an Android, just click on the review button, and we'd love to hear what you have to say about the podcast. Share it on social media. Tag a friend that may find this episode interesting and valuable, and be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss the next episode on Zing. And until next time, here's to being an amazing city.
This has been the Amazing Cities Podcast, a production of the Local Government Podcast Network, your choice for local government podcasting. For more information on services of the Local Government Podcast Network, please visit www.localgovpodcasts.com.